So let's start with who. And who is the who? It's Danielle. But she's not the only who. Who else might be important to my announcement for candidacy? Who else might I want to have there?
Endorsements.
Endorsements. Like who?
Nurses.
I'm sorry?
Nurses.
Nurses, because as Danielle does remember from class.
And firefighters.
Nurses and firefighters, exactly. Who else?
Teachers.
Teachers, particularly if you're running for an education-related office, teachers, principals, parents.
Other elected officials.
Other elected officials. And I think we talked about this a few weeks ago. You remember the whole concept of borrowed biographical credibility? The people who are with you or your candidate at the news conference are lending you their credibility. Danielle's nurses are there because she cares about healthcare. And there's nothing in her biography that backs that up, so the nurses are standing there to provide their biographical credibility. Firefighters are there, and by the way, she's exactly right. Firefighters are much more popular than police officers. Why? Sorry?
Family safe people they don't like.
Yeah. Nobody worries about nobody worries about the civil rights of fires. So it's a little bit easier. So firefighters, even more than police officers, are an extraordinary source of biographical credibility because it shows a commitment to public safety. As tell me your name? Laura, as Lauren suggested, particularly if we're running for an education-related office, having teachers, having principals there, you're borrowing their biographical credibility too. So the who isn't just the candidate. It's those surrogates, it's those supporters. Sometimes the who can be an aggregate. It's not necessarily an individual, just a lot of people showing up enthusiastic about your announcement. They're a who. Sometimes there are times when it makes sense for you to have family members there. Because they don't necessarily have biographical credibility. What's the benefit of having a family member, a spouse, or children standing with you when you announce your candidacy? Why do you think candidates do that?
Relatability.
I'm sorry?
Relatability.
Remember, we talked earlier this semester about an emotional connection. What's the importance of biography? It not only provides credibility, which is what we were talking about a moment ago, but a good biography provides an emotional connection. And the whole idea of finding that common ground is so the voter says, hey, he's just like me. Or she's had a very similar experience to what I've had. And when they see a spouse and kids, it's not universal, but it's a sign of potential emotional connection, and of course, of roots in the community. Now here's the key. You can invite as many people as you want to your news conference, to your announcement news conference, but I want to introduce a concept here that we're going to talk about in several other ways for the next 10 or 15 minutes. And that is, particularly for an event in which there is potential either still photo or video coverage, I want to introduce a concept called nonverbal message reinforcement. Nonverbal message reinforcement. What you learned over the first 2.5 class periods that we had was how to develop a verbal, spoken, written message. What I want to talk about today, particularly if you're standing up and having a news conference, is ways to reinforce, ways to strengthen that message visually rather than verbally. So you invite all those people to your news conference. But, getting back to a concept we've talked about over and over again, you have to prioritize. Because if I stand up and somebody takes a picture, if somebody takes a picture of me standing up at my news conference with firefighters and nurses and teachers and senior citizens all standing behind me, that's sort of a muddled message, isn't it? So I got to decide who are the surrogates who most strongly reinforce my message. Is it teachers? Is it firefighters? Is it nurses? Is it small business owners? And you think to yourself, what is the crux of my message? Is it preparing students for well-paying jobs? Is it diversity? Is it encouraging teacher excellence? Going back to the message that we developed in the first couple of classes, you say, what do I want to reinforce? What do I want to make sure people not only hear when they listen to me, but see when they look at me? And the first step toward that visual reinforcement is who else is standing with you. Someone had a hand up.
I was just going to say, having nurses, firefighters, teachers, I mean,
I don't know of a situation where that wouldn't help, like, that's just civil service, right? It's just like,
And I would say that there's nothing wrong with that, but you're much better off choosing
really?
and writing that all the way through. If you're, if your key mirror opposite is public safety, then what reinforces that are firefighters. If you are talking about children's health and prevention issues, then having nurses reinforces that mirror opposite. If you are talking about teacher training and excellence, having teachers. If you want to talk about former dropouts who somehow made good in society, then you have them there. But when you line them all up in a row, nothing bad happens, but nothing good happens either. At least not as much good. Yes?
If you're, let's say there's a situation where there's an interest group that you're trying to reach, and maybe the issue at point that you're talking about isn't, you're trying to gain their support and you're deciding who your servants should be in terms of like who's going to be standing behind you. Would you advise like a candidate to choose a surrogate that would automatically gain the support of your interest group, or like someone that would, a surrogate that would actually match like the message that you're trying to say?
Well, hopefully both.
Okay.
In other words, if you go back to the message development we did earlier in our class sessions, you're going to redo the original message that we discussed based on who the voters are that you're targeting. So that first iteration of the message is sort of basically an internal document. But once you learn about your opponent and the differentiators between you and the opponent, and once you figure out which voters are most important to you, you're going to redo that message, not to change your position, but to change which aspect of your agenda you emphasize. So what you'll have is you'll have an aspect of your message, whether it's one of your 3 issues or whether it's your biography, that helps you reach that key targeted voter group. And that's what you're going to be looking to reinforce. The what, like we talked about earlier, is simply that Danielle is announcing her candidacy and what the office is. Let's talk for a minute about the where. Because the where of the 5 W's is particularly important for 2 reasons. Both the nonverbal message reinforcement that we were talking about a moment ago, but also for the convenience of the reporters covering your campaign. When I was working with then Governor Wilson, I wanted at one point to have him announce an environmental measure. And I said, well, let's go to the Sierras. I thought to myself, can we really get reporters to come with us all the way from downtown Sacramento to the Sierras? Probably not. I thought, okay, well, we'll go to the ocean. We'll go to the Central Coast, stand with the water in the background. Well, also a pretty long trek for a newspaper reporter. Well, ultimately, we did the news conference on the lawn of the state capitol. He stood in front of a tree with leaves. It might not have been quite as majestic, but because he was a governor and not a presidential candidate, that was where we chose to hold our news conference for the sake of convenience, a compromise between convenience and nonverbal message reinforcement. But what I want you to think about when it comes to the where, of course, number one, like I said, convenience, holding it somewhere that reporters have access to. But second, think about the various ways in which the where of your announcement can reinforce the message. And I want you to think about the where in 3, yes, that's right, 3 different contexts. Location, setting, and backdrop. Location, setting, and backdrop. Location is making a decision at a broader geographical level. I am announcing my candidacy at Santa Monica Community College. I want to talk about higher education. It makes more sense for me to do it at a community college than at a UC school. So I'm going to go to Santa Monica Community College. Okay. That's the location. The setting answers the question, where on campus am I going to hold this announcement? Do I want to hold it in the library? Do I want to hold it in a more central outside area on campus? Do I want to hold it in a classroom? What am I trying to get across? Now, this might not show up in a photograph, it might not show up in video, but reporters are going to mention where I am on the news conference. And if I hold it at Santa Monica College, that reinforces my message in one way. if I hold it in the library or in the gymnasium or in the quad, wherever I hold it, that's going to get across a more specific message. And then finally is backdrop. And along with surrogates, the backdrop is physically, visually, what a still or a video camera will see behind my candidate when he or she is speaking. Now, this is the lousy thing about the social sciences. A political science classroom, not a particularly compelling backdrop, huh? So when you're thinking backdrops, here's what I'm going to recommend to you. Hard sciences, labs, lots of really weird tube things. I don't know what they do except that they look really, really smart and really, really academic. And if your announcement has nothing to do with chemistry, it doesn't matter anyway. Stand in front of the really cool tube-looking things. Because you want a backdrop that is more interesting than this is.
You got me thinking, the news this week, I'm sure you saw it, Romney recently did a press conference in front of Solyndra's, like, abandoned or closed down headquarters.
Oh, I thought you were going to talk about his fundraiser with Donald Trump as part of the WHO, but okay, we'll come back to that a little bit later also.
Yeah, that,
Anyway, so
I can't begin to understand.
So Solyndra.
Like, just from a purely scientific point of view, I mean, do you think that's an effective thing, or just is it a...
That, not so much the backdrop, but the location. But the location was a very.
Because that was a weird, like, he, like,